I had just finished the part where David faces Goliath not with armor, not with a sword, but with a slingshot and 5 smooth stones. My voice had dropped to a whisper for effect, and the grandchildren leaned closer, their small faces lit with wonder. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit against her heart like it might protect her from the imagined thunder of Goliath's footsteps. Lucas, wide-eyed, mouthed David's words along with me. You come at me with sword and spear, but I come at you in the name of the Lord. That's when the door burst open. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, stood in the doorway with her lips pressed tight and her arms crossed, the way she looked when she found crumbs on the counter or too much salt in the soup. But this time, it wasn't crumbs. It was the children's Bible in my lap. I thought we talked about this, she said, her voice clipped. I told you, Ruth, no more of these stories. I closed the book gently, like I was tucking in something sacred. Emma blinked up at her mother, confused. Lucas shifted on the couch, his fingers curling into the hem of my apron. Amanda stepped forward and plucked the Bible from my hands. It wasn't a snatch, not quite, but the gesture was final. We don't want them confused by fairy tales about invisible sky daddies, she said with a strained smile, as if humor might soften the blow. It's not healthy. They need facts. Science. I looked to the doorway where Daniel, my son, had appeared. His face was unreadable. His shoulders slumped like someone watching a dog get scolded for something it didn't understand. He didn't speak. I folded my hands in my lap. Of course, dear, I said softly. I understand. Amanda turned on her heel and left the room with the book. Daniel followed her after a pause. Neither said goodbye. Emma turned to me. Nona, why did she take the book? I smoothed back a curl from her forehead and kissed it gently. She just doesn't see the stories the way we do, Tesoro. That's all. But they're good stories, Lucas said. David was brave. He was, I said. Braver than most grown-ups I know. We finished our cocoa in silence. I knew better than to keep reading. Amanda had drawn her line, but she didn't know what I'd been doing in the early mornings, before the house stirred, while the world still smelled like dew and last night's dreams. In a drawer under my bed, hidden beneath folded scarves and a tin of lavender tea, were 6 full notebooks, each page written in my steady, looping hand. Retellings of the Bible stories I'd taught for over 40 years. But not the stiff, sanitized ones from the Sunday school curriculum. These were warm and earthy, woven with the same cadence I used when tucking Emma and Lucas into bed. There were jokes and fears and colors and smells. Goliath's breath like sour milk, the muddy sandals of the shepherd boy, the way Mary's voice must have shaken when the angel first appeared. They weren't just Bible stories. They were our stories. I'd started writing them 2 years ago, not out of rebellion but memory. After my husband Pietro died, the house had gone too quiet. The grief pressed in from the corners, seeping into the wallpaper. But then one morning, Emma asked me why people prayed. I didn't give her a doctrine. I gave her a story, Hannah. Whispering through tears in the temple, praying so hard the priest thought she was drunk. That story made Emma laugh, and then it made her quiet. Then it made her ask, did God really hear her? I answered the only way I knew how. Yes, Tesoro, and he still does. That's when I started writing them down. At first, it was just a way to pass the mornings. But then Sarah, a former student of mine who had become a literary agent, came to visit. She saw my notebooks stacked beside the kettle and asked, "Are these yours?" I nodded. She read the story of Jonah aloud in my kitchen and laughed so hard she cried. "You need to publish these," she said. "Do you know how rare this voice is? You write like someone sitting beside a fire, passing down treasure." I shook my head at the time. I was too old. Too tired. Too nothing. But that was before Amanda called them poison. That evening, after the children went to bed, I sat at the table with a blank page and wrote, Chapter 1. David and the Stone That Sang. I didn't write out of vengeance. I wrote because I had been silenced, and stories were the only voice I had left. Amanda had taken my book, but not the story, and not the truth that lived in me, where even she couldn't reach. When Daniel passed through the kitchen that night, he paused, watching me scribble in the low lamp glow. Working on your crossword? He asked, tone casual. I didn't look up. No, just remembering. Something important. He stood there, hands in pockets, wanting to say more but not knowing how. He'd grown quieter since Amanda had gotten her new job, more absent in his own home. I felt for him, but I didn't pity him. He was a grown man and silence was a choice. Before bed, I slipped the page into the folder with the others. 6 full notebooks, a growing 7th. When I turned out the light and climbed into bed, I placed the folder under my pillow like it was a keepsake, a relic of something sacred. I stared at the ceiling and whispered the prayer I always whispered when the house felt cold. Let my stories be seeds. I didn't know yet how they would grow, but I believed they would. The morning after Amanda took the Bible, the house was quieter than usual. Not the good kind of quiet, the sacred hush before children wake or bread finishes, baking, but the tight-lipped silence of tension. Even the kettle seemed to whistle more sharply, like it knew not to linger too long. I poured water into the teapot and placed it on the table where the sunlight always found a way through the curtains, no matter how Amanda tried to rearrange the furniture. Across from me sat the small ceramic dish Emma made in preschool, lopsided and painted with streaks of orange and purple. I used it every day for my tea bag, even though Amanda had tried to throw it out once. She called it clutter. I called it memory. Daniel came into the kitchen in his usual rush, adjusting his tie and skimming his phone at the same time. Morning, I said, placing a plate of toast and apricot jam in front of him. He glanced up with a faint smile. Thanks, Mom. You'll need your strength today. Emma has a school project. You promised to help her with the volcano. He blinked as if trying to retrieve the memory. Right, the baking soda thing. She wants to use red food coloring for the lava. Told me God made volcanoes because he liked surprises. That earned the smallest smile from him, but it faded quickly. Amanda says she's not supposed to say stuff like that. I sipped my tea. Children will say what's in their hearts. It's our job to listen before we silence it. He didn't respond. Just finished his tist, kissed me on the forehead, and left the house with more guilt on his back than his briefcase could carry. Amanda didn't come down until after the children had left for school. She wore a pressed white blouse and dark jeans, her hair in a severe bun that seemed to flatten her expression even further. She poured herself coffee, didn't say good morning, and opened her laptop at the far end of the table. I didn't push conversation. I rarely did. But when she spoke, it was always like a glass slipping from the counter sharp, fast, and impossible to catch in time. You didn't say anything else to the kids last night, did you? I folded the dish towel neatly. Just a good-night prayer. Silent, in my own head. Let's keep it that way, she said. It's confusing for them. I wanted to say what was confusing was hearing about God one day, and being told it was all nonsense the next. But I didn't. I just nodded. She stood abruptly, grabbed her laptop, and paused at the doorway. We'll start looking for assisted living places in a few weeks. You deserve your own space. Of course, I said, like I was being offered a gift. She left without another word. Later that afternoon, I retrieved my notebooks and sat at the corner of the dining table with my reading glasses perched low on my nose. The children would be home in a few hours, and I wanted to finish rewriting the story of Moses before the house filled again with footsteps and tension. I had just written the part where Miriam watches the basket float in the reeds when a soft knock tapped the door. It was Emma. She carried a paper in one hand and a worried look in the other. "Nona, can you help me with my writing homework?" "Of course, come sit." She sat beside me, glanced at my notebook but said nothing. "We're supposed to write about someone brave." I wanted to write about David, but Mommy says we should write about real people, I smiled. "Then you should write about your teacher or your bus driver, or maybe a nurse or firefighter." She looked down. "I want to write about David." I thought for a moment, then tore a blank page from my own notebook. "Then write it here first. Just for you and me." She beamed, and I swear the light coming through the window shifted just for her. While she scribbled, I returned to my story. Miriam's song after the sea parted. A woman's strength, quiet but powerful. I thought of all the stories where women stood behind the scenes, unnoticed and unthanked, while the world changed in front of them. I thought of myself. Emma hugged me before she left for her room. "Don't forget to save the story. It's special." "I won't," I said. And I wouldn't. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by my window with a pen in one hand and the past in the other. The light from the street lamps flickered, and I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. The first story I ever told Daniel. He was 3 and afraid of the dark. I had told him about Noah's Ark, not the animals but the waiting. The rain falling day after day. And how Noah must have wondered if God had forgotten him. But still he waited, and the dove came back with a branch in its beak. That branch, I told Daniel then, meant the world was healing. That was the moment he first believed the world could get better. And now, somehow, he had forgotten. Or maybe he'd been talked out of remembering. I picked up my pen and began to write again. Not just stories now, but memory. My voice. My legacy. They could take the Bible off the shelf. They could label my stories as dangerous. But what they forgot was this. I remembered. And that meant everything. 2 days passed before Amanda said anything again. I noticed she hadn't returned. The children's Bible. It wasn't on the bookshelf where it usually sat. I didn't ask for it back. Asking would give her something to deny. Instead, I waited. I folded laundry, made soup, watered the rosemary by the window, and worked in silence on my manuscript while they assumed I was simply biding time until someone else dictated the next phase of my life. But I was not idle. The quiet wasn't empty, it was focused, the way still water hides a current beneath. That Thursday, I caught Amanda in my room. I came in from the back porch after clipping basil when I heard rustling. I stopped just outside my bedroom door. She didn't hear me. She was hunched at my dresser, flipping through drawers, pausing, pulling things out. The children's story notebook sat open on my bed, pages fluttering under the ceiling fan. My voice didn't rise. I simply stepped in, looking for something. Amanda startled, then quickly composed herself. "Your devotional books," she said, as if the act were a chore. "And collecting things the kids might get into. Just organizing." I walked over and closed the notebook gently, my hand resting on it a moment longer than needed. "They don't read my drawers," I said. "They knock." Amanda straightened. "I just don't think it's healthy for them to keep hearing these stories. Stories about compassion, about justice, sacrifice, about talking snakes and burning bushes. Ruth, it's mythology. They need reason, not fantasy." I didn't argue. I never won with fire. Instead, I picked up the notebook and tucked it under my arm. When I was their age, I said quietly, I learned that stories were how we remembered who we were. Before books, before school's faith was carried in the mouth, not the hand. Amanda looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. She stepped toward the door, but paused before leaving. I've started looking into assisted living places. There's a facility with open rooms across town. It's close to the hospital. Very modern. You'd have your own kitchenette. I'm sure it's lovely, I replied, and meant it, in a way. She left, closing the door too hard. I stood alone in the room, surrounded by the smell of lavender and old wood polish. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the notebook again, flipping to a page I'd written weeks ago, Daniel in the Lion's Den. I had written it for Lucas, who was afraid of the dark hallway. In my version, Daniel prayed not because he was fearless, but because he was afraid and still chose trust. Ran my finger down the page and whispered the last line to myself. God didn't shut the mouths of the lions because Daniel was brave. He shut them because Daniel believed, even when it was quiet. I had always believed, even when the house grew quiet in all the wrong ways. That evening, Sarah called. I've been thinking about those notebooks, she said. I know we discussed maybe pitching it as a small press idea, but Ruth, if we format it right, this could be something bigger. Bigger how? I asked, though I already knew what she meant. A full series. Illustrated. Marketed to churches, schools, homeschool communities. There's a demand for this voice one that doesn't sound sanitized or performative. I stared at the bookshelf across from me, the spot where Amanda had removed the cross-stitch my late husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. It used to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now there was only a framed photo of a plant. Can we do it quietly? I asked. Without drama? Of course, Sarah said. But eventually, someone will notice. Especially if it sells. Like I think it will. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Let them. After we ended the call, I spent the rest of the night typing. It was slow work. I'd never learned to type quickly, but each word felt like a stone in a foundation. I typed until the house went dark and the last car passed outside. I typed until my wrists ached and my eyes blurred. In the morning, Daniel saw the typed pages by the printer. He picked them up absent-mindedly while sipping his coffee. You're writing? He asked. A collection, I said. For the kids. He flipped through them, read a paragraph about the parting of the Red Sea, then handed them back. I didn't know you could do this. I taught Sunday school for 40 years. You think I never learned to tell a story? He smiled, sheepish. You think Amanda would be okay with? I raised a brow. Amanda doesn't have to be okay with everything. He didn't argue, just finished his coffee in silence. That was the last day I left the notebooks on the table. After that, I kept them close. Not because I was hiding, but because I was preparing. Saturday morning came in quietly, wrapped in golden light and the smell of cinnamon toast. I woke earlier than usual, not from habit, but from a knot in my stomach I couldn't quite explain. Something unspoken had begun to form in the walls of this house, a kind of tension that vibrated under the floorboards. Daniel and Amanda had taken the children to a science museum that day. Something Amanda announced over breakfast with a tone far too pointed to be casual. We'll be out most of the day, she said, buttering toast. There's a paleontology exhibit. Lucas is fascinated with fossils right now. I nodded, though she didn't make eye contact. Emma looked at me with a guilty sort of smile and whispered, I wish you were coming. I'll see what fossils you bring back, I said softly, kissing her forehead. The door closed behind them, and the silence left in their absence felt both relieving and sharp. I stood for a while in the kitchen, staring at the empty table. The 4 chairs left askew. I spent the early afternoon cleaning, not to tidy up but to anchor myself. Some women pray with rosary beads. I prayed by aligning the forks in the drawer and pressing wrinkles from tea towels. In the linen closet, I found the children's old Easter crafts, a construction paper cross with crook stickers, a small lamb made from cotton balls tossed behind a stack of unused blankets. I brought them back to my room and placed them beside my writing desk, a quiet reclaiming of what still belonged to me. Around 2 o'clock, I went to check my email. Sarah had sent edits on the first manuscript. Her note was full of encouragement and a few gentle suggestions. Tighten the ending of Noah. Cut one of the storm scenes. But the voice, Ruth, the voice is perfect. It's exactly what's been missing in this genre. Don't change that. I reread the line twice. Exactly what's been missing. I hadn't been told I was necessary in a long time. Just as I finished replying, I heard a low vibration. Amanda had left her tablet charging on the hallway console. The screen lit up with a notification. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Group chat. Moms who think. Amanda. We're making progress. I moved most of her religious stuff into storage bins. She still doesn't know. Another message followed. Amanda. If she reacts, I've got backups. Screenshots. Audio clips. She keeps telling the kids things like, God made the stars, like we're living in the 1800s. I felt as though the floor beneath me shifted. Not from surprise, but recognition. I had suspected this for weeks, maybe longer. The missing picture. Frames, the quiet shifts in the children's language, Emma, no longer saying grace without prompting. Lucas hesitating before bedtime prayers. I had noticed the erosion. But here it was in print. Deliberate, documented, organized. What chilled me wasn't the act, but the smile Amanda wore while bringing me tea, or asking if I needed anything from the store. There had been no cruelty in her voice-only performance. Turned away from the screen and walked slowly to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, both hands gripping the edge of the mattress. A storm was gathering, but not one I would weather the way Amanda expected. I wasn't going to plead or argue. That would only become more ammunition. I opened my drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound book my husband gave me the year Emma was born. I hadn't opened it in months. On the first page, in his handwriting, it read, To Ruth, you carry light in your stories. Don't let anyone dim it. I traced the writing with my fingers. Then I made a decision. That evening, when the family returned, I was setting the table. I'd made lentil soup and fresh focaccia, the same meal I made the day Daniel got his first job interview. As we sat to eat, Amanda gave me one of her unreadable glances. The house looks really clean, she said. Did you finally go through your books? I placed the ladle into the bowl gently. No, I prefer to keep what matters near. There was a flicker of something in her expression, annoyance. Suspicion? But she said nothing else. That night, after the children were asleep, I emailed Sarah again. Let's move forward with the publishing contract, and I'd like to release it under a pen name. She replied within the hour. Understood. What name do you want? I looked toward the photo on my nightstand. It was of my grandmother, holding me as a baby in a faded floral dress, rosary beads in one hand. Her name was Anna Lucia. I typed, Lucia R. Benedetti. R for Ruth. Benedetti. For the blessings I refused to bury. By Monday, the manuscript was complete. 83 pages of soft-edged faith and memory, written not as a protest but as a preservation. Each parable was recast in a child's rhythm stories about giants and mustard seeds, wandering hearts, and the strength of small things. I had written them for Emma and Lucas, but now I understood they weren't the only ones who needed them. Sarah arranged a video call that evening with the publishing team. I took the call from the small desk in my bedroom, angled the laptop so they couldn't see the linen closet where I kept the Easter crafts and the copy of Amanda's group chat printed and tucked inside my Bible. Lucia, Sarah said, using my pen name with practiced ease. Meet Jonah and Melissa. They're lead editors at Wellspring. They looked younger than I expected, early 40s maybe, but their faces were earnest. Melissa smiled first. We've been working in children's faith publishing for over a decade, she said. But your manuscript, it's something else. It doesn't feel like it's talking down to kids. It feels like it's inviting them into a story they already half remember. Jonah leaned in. We'd like to acquire the full manuscript, fast-track it to illustrations, and set a soft launch within 4 months. If you're ready, we'll send over the paperwork this week. I nodded, hands folded neatly. I'm ready. They didn't know who I really was. Not yet. That would come later if it needed to. For now, I was Lucia R. Benedetti, grandmother of Grace, teller of stories, and owner of a quiet fire. After the call, I sat still for a long time. The weight of the moment pressed gently against my shoulders, like a hand that says, now begins the next part. But the house around me remained the same. The sounds of dinner being cleaned up in the kitchen, the murmurs of a cartoon drifting up from the living room. The world hadn't changed, not yet. That evening, I found Amanda in the laundry room folding towels. Her phone was tucked into her back pocket, screen facing out. She hummed softly, something too cheerful, and didn't look up when I stepped in. I'll take care of the linens, I said calmly. She turned. You don't have to, I know, but I will. Something about my tone made her pause. She studied me for a moment, then slowly handed over the stack. I took the towels and walked them to the guest closet, the one Daniel had once cleared out so I could move in after Pietro's passing. As I opened the door, a box caught my eye. It was labeled in Amanda's handwriting, Mom's Stuff-Storage. I opened it slowly. Inside were my devotionals, several of my personal notebooks, and a tin that once held Pietro's prayer cards. I sifted through the pile, careful, methodical. Beneath a folder of my teaching notes, I found a sealed envelope. It wasn't mine. Inside was a printed draft of a legal form, a guardianship document. My name appeared at the top, under the heading, Subject to Care Planning. Amanda had marked sections in yellow. Notes in the margin read, Behavioral patterns and evidence of religious obsession. I stood there, breath caught between disbelief and clarity. This wasn't just about storytelling. This was preparation for erasure. Legal erasure. I carried the envelope back to my room and scanned every page. Then I filed it beneath the printed chat logs, careful to note the date. I didn't confront Amanda. That would come later, if necessary. I wasn't going to argue with someone who treated me like a footnote in their own version of history. Instead, I went to the bookshelf and retrieved an old manila folder I hadn't touched in over a year. It held a copy of the college funds I had quietly created when Emma was born, and again when Lucas followed. They weren't in Amanda's name. They never had been. With a pen in hand, I rewrote the terms. They would remain in trust. That now, they would be directed into a scholarship fund under the Lucia R. Benedetti Foundation for children raised by grandparents, for those whose stories were interrupted, for the ones being silenced in kitchens, churches, or courtrooms. Sarah knew a lawyer. I sent her the papers before midnight. The next morning, Emma knocked softly on my door before school. She carried a small paper folded in half. I wrote, "My brave story," she said, placing it on my lap. "It's about you." I opened the paper. In pencil, crooked letters read, "My grandma is brave because she tells stories even when people don't want her to. She says stories are like seeds. If you plant them, they grow even when no one watches." I kissed her on the forehead. "Don't ever forget your voice, Tesoro. Even if someone tells you it's too quiet." Amanda called from the hallway. "Shoes on. We're late." Emma waved goodbye and ran off. After the house emptied, I made tea and sat in the armchair near the window. The light came in soft through the lace curtain. I opened my notebook and began writing a new story. This one wasn't for Emma or Lucas. It wasn't for Sarah or the publisher. It was for me. It was about a woman whose voice had been buried for years under politeness and self-sacrifice, who'd spent decades telling stories to keep others whole only. To realize that, in the end, her story mattered too. She wasn't angry. She wasn't loud, but she was no longer afraid. The morning the contract arrived, the house was still. Daniel had already left for work, and Amanda had taken the children early for a dentist appointment. It gave me time, rare, uninterrupted time. Sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once celebrated birthdays with plastic forks and buttercream frosting, where Emma had first spelled her name without help. I cleared it now like a stage. The manila envelope Sarah sent rested in the center, pristine and final. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside, the formal publishing contract. A glossy draft of the book's cover mock-up. Title across the top in warm serif font. Grandma. Lucia's Bible Stories, Faith and Wonder for Tender Hearts. There was an illustration too. A child seated on a rug, gazing up at a grandmother whose face looked remarkably like mine. The likeness startled me, a familiar slant to the nose. The bun pinned just so, the apron floral and soft. It was as if they had drawn me without ever seeing me. Below that, my pseudonym, Lucia R. Benedetti. It didn't feel like hiding anymore. It felt like blooming under a new name. Not to escape, but to speak more clearly. I signed each page with deliberate care, the way I used to sign report cards when I taught firm. Legible, with full stops at the end of my name. When I was finished, I sat back in my chair and pressed both palms flat against the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my skin. The house remained quiet, but something had shifted inside it. Inside me. This was real now. I walked to the mailbox 2 blocks away and dropped the return envelope inside. The wind tugged at my shawl as I stood a moment longer, watching the red flag rise. It was done. The stories were no longer mine alone. They belonged to whoever needed them most. That afternoon, Amanda returned earlier than expected. I heard her come in through the garage, the door slamming harder than usual. I was in the laundry room folding linens again, not for utility, but rhythm, when her voice echoed down the hallway. "Did you send something out today?" I stepped out slowly, folding cloth still in my hands. "Yes." "What was it?" "Just a story," I said. She stared at me, mouth tightening. "You've been doing something. I can feel it. You're not just playing grandmother anymore." I didn't flinch. "I've always done more than play. You just stopped looking." She opened her mouth to reply but closed it again. I returned to folding towels. She didn't follow me. That evening, after the children were asleep, I stood at the sliding door looking out onto the backyard. The garden. Lights flickered near the hedges. The rosemary and mint I planted last spring were still growing. Despite everything. Or maybe because of it. Daniel came up beside me. "Mum," he said gently. "Amanda's worried. She said you've been independent." I offered. "Focused? Busy?" He hesitated. She thinks you're becoming oppositional. I turned to him fully. And what do you think? He looked tired, older than his years. I don't know what to think anymore. I reached out, placing my hand on his. Daniel, when you were 8, you once told your class that your favorite thing in the world was listening to me tell you stories. You said it helped you feel safe. He smiled faintly, as if remembering something almost lost. I did. You did. And it mattered. I didn't mean to let it go this far, he said, almost to himself. But I thought, maybe Amanda was right. That kids need something more modern. Truth doesn't expire, Daniel, and kindness doesn't go out of fashion. We stood in silence, side by side. I miss you, he said finally. The version of us that used to talk. I'm still here, I said. But I won't stay quiet to be convenient. He nodded, then stepped back inside without another word. The next day, Sarah called with news. A prominent Christian parenting blog wanted to feature an interview with Lucia R. Benedetti and a preview of the first story. I laughed. What will they say when they find out Lucia wears orthopedic shoes and still calls the pharmacy by phone? They'll say she has wisdom, Sarah replied. And they'll be right. Before hanging up, she added, We're printing 20,000 copies for the first run. I pressed my hand to my chest. Not from fear, just the weight of what that number meant. It was no longer about Amanda, or Daniel, or even the children. It had become something bigger. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was just trying not to disappear. That night, I stayed up late writing thank you letters to Sarah, to Melissa at Wellspring, even to the woman who sketched the cover art. I wanted them to know that what they helped me build wasn't just a book. It was an act of survival. And of grace. The interview request came sooner than I expected. Sarah forwarded the message with a brief note. They'd like to feature you in next month's Women of Quiet Courage series. Just one photo and a few questions over the phone. We can control the narrative. That phrase stuck with me. Control the narrative. For so long, I had been part of someone else's version of events. Amanda's version, mostly clean, curated, secular. Her world had no place for stories that didn't end with data or diagrams. She believed conviction was something you grew out of, something you shed like a baby tooth. I printed the interview questions and spread them out on the bed, smoothing the pages flat with both hands. They were simple enough. Why did you write this book? What message do you hope to pass on to children? But each one unlocked 100 memories. I didn't answer them immediately. Instead, I went for a walk. It was mid-morning, and the sky had turned that soft pewter color it gets before spring truly wakes up. I passed the community library, the place I used to take Daniel on quiet Saturday afternoons when he was too shy to make friends and too bright to sit still. I remembered the exact chair he used to curl into, the way he'd lose himself in a book, his small hand still resting on my knee as he read. I'd nearly reached the park when I saw her, Amanda standing with another mother near the playground, sipping coffee from a stainless steel mug and laughing in that sharp, high way that meant she wasn't really amused. Emma and Lucas were on the swings, pushing themselves rhythmically. I didn't wave. I simply stood behind the line of hedges and watched. Amanda's voice carried just far enough. She's sweet, but I swear she still thinks the earth is 6,000 years old. I've had to undo so much of what she's taught the kids. They used to believe angels guarded their beds. The other woman chuckled politely. At least she means well. Amanda rolled her eyes. Meaning well isn't the same as doing good. That was enough. I turned back the way I came. That night, I answered every question from the interview. Why did I write this book? Because children deserve stories that hold space for mystery. Because faith is not the opposite of thinking. It's what thinking looks like when softened by wonder. What message do I hope to pass on? That truth can be kind. That courage sometimes looks like a grandmother reading aloud even after her voice has been dismissed. The final question was open-ended. What do you want the world to know about you? I stared at the blinking cursor for nearly an hour. Then, without overthinking, I wrote that I was here, that I listened, that I loved them enough to leave something behind. The next day, I submitted my responses and included a photo Emma had taken of me one morning as I read to her by the window. I'd forgotten about it until I found it tucked into one of her art folders, a slightly blurry image. But my face was soft, my hands mid-gesture, and the sun had caught in the silver of my hair like a halo. No makeup, no filters. Just me and a book and a child who still believed. Later that afternoon, Amanda found me in the kitchen preparing ravioli for dinner. She moved through the space with the kind of tension that builds before thunder. She opened the fridge, closed it, took out a plate, set it down too hard. Finally, she turned to me. Are you planning something? I met her gaze. Yes. She blinked, thrown off by my honesty. I've written something, I said evenly. It's being published. Her mouth opened, then closed. You, what? Book, I continued. For children. Faith stories. It's already in production. You can't, she stopped herself. You didn't even discuss this with us. It wasn't up for discussion, I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. It's my work, my voice. I've given enough without asking for permission. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. And you think this will make things better? You think undermining us? I'm not undermining anyone, I said. I'm building something. You don't have to agree with it, but you won't erase it. Her face tightened. This affects the kids. It does, I agreed. And I trust that one day, when they're ready, they'll decide for themselves. What mattered? She walked out without finishing the conversation. I didn't follow her. Instead, I returned to my bedroom, pulled open the desk drawer, and took out the first printed proof Sarah had mailed. The pages were thick. The binding, still warm from the press. On the dedication page, in simple font, it read, For Emma and Lucas. May the stories you carry lead you home. I ran my hand over the words and exhaled slowly. That evening, Daniel came into my room. He stood in the doorway, awkward, unsure. Amanda told me, he said. About the book. I nodded, waiting. She's upset. I know. He looked down. But I'm not. I raised an eyebrow. I read some of it, he admitted. The part about Moses. The one where he's scared and stutters but still leads. That one was always for you, I said. He smiled. A real smile this time. I think it'll help more people than she realizes. I don't need everyone to understand, I said. Just one heart at a time. He stepped closer, touched the edge of the manuscript. You did good, Mom. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you. It wasn't full reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a start. A turning. A door quietly, finally, opening. The article came out on a Thursday morning. Sarah texted me at 6, breathless even in her words. It's live. Front page of the parenting section. And Ruth people are already sharing it. I waited until the kettle finished whistling before I opened the link. The page loaded slowly, my old laptop humming under the effort. When the image appeared, my photograph, the one Emma had taken, I stared at it in stillness. There I was, a grandmother in soft light, mid-story, eyes full of some emotion I hadn't realized was visible. To others, the headline read, "Meet Lucia R. Benedetti, the grandmother restoring Wonder One story at a time." I read the article in silence, one sip of tea at a time. They had chosen quotes that felt like my own voice. There was no twist or mockery, no soft ridicule hidden behind flattery. Just the truth. A retired teacher, a woman of faith, writing stories to give children something enduring. At the bottom of the article, readers had already left comments. Reminds me of my nana reading Psalms before bed. We need more voices like this in children's literature. Buying a copy for every Sunday school teacher I know. I sat back in my chair, hands around my mug, and exhaled through my nose. It wasn't pride, I felt it was relief. I hadn't realized how long I'd been bracing for shame. By noon, the article had made its rounds. I received an email from a librarian in Minnesota, a grandmother in Texas, and a youth pastor in Ontario, all asking if I might be willing to speak at a virtual event or send signed copies. I said yes to each one, of course, but the quiet victory did not go unnoticed in the house. Amanda came home in a rush that afternoon, her heels echoing against the hardwood. I was peeling potatoes at the kitchen sink. She didn't speak until the children were upstairs, backpacks thudding softly as they hit the floor. "You should have told us." I kept my voice level. "I tried. You didn't ask." "This?" She waved her phone in the air. "This article makes it look like we've been silencing you. People are sharing it with commentary about religious discrimination." I turned off the tap. Did I lie? That's not the point. I dried my hands on a dish towel. It is to me. Amanda leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. "You've made this house look like a battleground." I didn't respond immediately. I studied her face, tired, sharp, but beneath the steel there was something softer. Wounded, even. Amanda wasn't used to being challenged quietly. She understood confrontation. She knew how to dismantle a loud complaint, that silence with purpose that unsettled her. "I wrote stories," I said, "because I wasn't allowed to speak them." "That's not warfare, Amanda. That's survival." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked out, leaving the door open behind her. Later that night, Daniel came to my room again. He held his phone up. "I read it," he said. "All of it." "And?" He smiled a little. "It's good. Really good." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, "They're asking me at work if you're really my mom." I laughed softly. "I hope you said no. Wouldn't want to tarnish your modern image." He chuckled. "I told them I grew up with a bedtime story every night, and I turned out all right." I raised an eyebrow. "Debatable." He took a breath, then turned serious. "I wish I'd stood up for you sooner." "You still can," I said. "This isn't about proving anything. It's about letting the kids know that truth comes in more than one language." He nodded, his eyes dropping to the manuscript on my desk. "I've been reading to Lucas from your draft," he said quietly. "Before bed. He asks for the David one." I smiled. "He likes bravery. He likes knowing the little guy can win." I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. The following week, copies of the book arrived. Brown boxes stacked neatly at the foot of my bed, each one stamped with a logo that felt surreal. I opened the first gently, like it might shatter in my hands. The cover was just as I remembered, but seeing it in print made something tighten in my chest. I ran my fingers across the textured lettering and opened to the dedication again. "For Emma and Lucas." I wrote a personal note in the front of 2 copies and tucked them into their backpacks when no one was looking. On Friday, Emma came home from school clutching the book like it was a secret treasure. She found me in the living room and climbed onto the couch beside me. "They have your book in the library," she whispered. "Do they?" She nodded, wide-eyed. "My teacher said it's already been checked out 3 times. Did you tell her it was your Nona?" "No. I liked keeping it to myself." I kissed the top of her head. "That's all right. Some treasures are sweeter. In secret." Lucas came in behind her and crawled into my lap. "Did Goliath really fall down in one hit?" "He did," I said. "But not because David was the strongest. Because he believed he didn't need to be." Amanda passed by in the hallway just then. She paused, watching us. For the first time, her face held no judgment. Only quiet. I didn't know what she was thinking, and I didn't ask. Some stories unfold slower than others. The first school invitation came the following Monday, tucked among emails about insurance, bills and grocery ads. A modest request from a small, private Christian academy in Vermont, asking if I would be willing to read from my book for their grandparents' day celebration. The message was signed by the principal herself, who had seen the article and called the book "a breath of reverent air in a noisy world." I stared at the email a long while before clicking reply. I wrote back, "Yes," with joy, and hit send before I could hesitate. After that, the invitations multiplied. More schools, Sunday school programs, bookstores asking about readings. A church in Tennessee offered to cover airfare just to have me speak for 20 minutes about why stories still matter. I didn't accept them all, but each message reminded me that the world still had a place for gentle truth if someone had the courage to offer it plainly. But the more visible I became, the more strained things grew at home. Amanda stopped making eye contact. She started skipping dinner, claiming work meetings or appointments. The children noticed. Emma asked why her mother didn't want to listen to the stories I read on the couch. "She's just busy." "Tesoro," I said, brushing her hair back. "People sometimes don't know how to listen until something breaks through the noise." Daniel tried to smooth things, but he was careful, too careful. I could see the tightness in his shoulders when I mentioned the book. The way his fingers twitched when Emma talked about how much her classmates liked the stories. One night after dinner, he pulled me aside. "She's feeling cornered," he said. "Like you're gaining influence over the kids she can't match." "I'm not in competition," I replied. "I know that," he said quickly. "But she doesn't." I let the silence settle between us. "I'm not asking you to stop," he added quietly. I want peace in the house." "There's a kind of peace that looks like silence," I said. "And another that comes from being heard. I won't trade one for the other anymore." That night, I sat by my window, the draft slipping through the corners of the old frame, and wrote a story called The Widow Who Wouldn't Vanish. It was fictional, but barely. A woman ignored by her family until she became someone the world could no longer dismiss. At the end of the story, she did not return to her family out of pity, nor out of pride. She returned because the door was open from the inside, not because someone knocked, but because they finally understood what they had shut out. That story would never be published. It was for me, a seed I needed to plant in my own heart. 2 weeks later, the first author copies sold out. Wellspring placed another order. 50,000 units. Sarah called me, elated. "You've gone viral in the right circles." Faith-based parenting forums, TikTok grandmothers with book clubs. Even a bishop in St. Louis quoted one of your lines in a sermon. What line? "Truth doesn't expire, it just waits for a voice brave enough to speak it again." Chuckled. "I thought I wrote that in the margin." "You did," she said. "We added it to the back cover for the next printing." The next morning, Amanda found me in the kitchen, making biscotti. She stood in the doorway longer than usual. Finally, she said, Lucas brought your book to school again. I didn't turn from the counter. They're allowed to read what speaks to them. She walked in slowly, resting her palms on the island. I thought they were too young for this kind of certainty, for talk of angels and purpose. I looked up. What made you think certainty was dangerous? Because it was used against me, she said. Her voice trembled slightly. I was raised in a house where doubt was punished. Questions meant sin. I wanted better for them. Her words landed like stones. Heavy. True. I never wanted to erase you, she continued. I just didn't know how to separate your stories from the ones that hurt me. I set down the spoon. Amanda, I said, stories don't save us unless we let them change. What I'm offering them isn't fear. It's faith with space to breathe. She didn't respond at first, but her eyes had softened. I don't know how to undo what I've done, she said. What I said about you. What I let the kids believe. I reached across the counter and took her hand gently. You don't have to undo it. Just stop repeating it. Her lips pressed together. I saw what you wrote, she said after a long pause. That story in your notebook. The widow who wouldn't vanish. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't know you still checked my drawers. I don't. Emma showed it to me. She said it felt like it was about you. I smiled. It is. But not entirely. I think it's about me too, she whispered. We stood in that quiet a while, surrounded by the scent of almond and citrus dot. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. And it felt like enough for now. By mid-April, I had begun receiving letters in the mail. Not emails, real letters. Folded with care, sealed with stamps that had passed through small towns and cities, school mailrooms and church offices. They came from parents, grandparents, even children who signed their names in uneven scrawls. Each envelope felt like a ripple from some stone I'd cast quietly, now echoing farther than I imagined. One came from a boy in Montana who said, I told my mom David was small but brave, and she cried. Thank you for that. Another from a retired Sunday school teacher in Michigan read, You gave me permission to pick up the Bible again, not as a rule book, but as a well of wonder. I kept them in a wooden box under my bed. A growing archive of quiet courage sent to me in ink and love. Still, not everything was healed at home. Amanda remained cautious. Polite, in the way you are with someone you've once wounded. Unsure how to apologize without reopening what had already bled. She had softened, yes, but there was a distance she still guarded, and I respected it. We spoke less, but when we did, it was real. Daniel had grown more present. He asked more questions about the book, about the letters. He started helping Lucas memorize the Psalms, not for school, just because Lucas asked to. And the children, they blossomed. Emma read from the book during show and tell. Lucas started keeping a small notebook of his own, writing down what he called God thoughts before bed. Still, I waited for the moment the story would turn again. Life has a rhythm like that: growth, rest, and then a test. It came one Tuesday evening. I had just finished reading The Woman at the Well to Lucas when the doorbell rang. Unusual at that hour. Amanda opened the door and inspected a woman I didn't recognize. Well-dressed, tight smile, clipboard in hand. Mrs. D'Angelo? She asked. Amanda stepped aside, visibly confused. She's my mother-in-law. The woman looked directly at me. I'm here on behalf of the district's Child Wellness Office. We've received a complaint regarding religious coercion in the household. Amanda froze. I'm sorry, she said. The woman glanced at her clipboard. The claim states that the children are being subjected to persistent spiritual instruction without parental consent. I stood up slowly. Who filed this? She hesitated. It's anonymous, but protocol requires an in-person check. Daniel arrived home moments later. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked through the door to see a government official in his living room, clipboard in hand, asking questions about bedtime stories and prayer journals. Amanda tried to explain. She fumbled, backtracked, clarified. We had disagreements, yes, but that's been resolved. My children are not being coerced. That the woman had already begun making notes. The conversation went on for nearly 40 minutes. She interviewed the children, asked about their routines, what they were taught, if they ever felt afraid or forced. Emma answered clearly. My Nona tells stories, like my teacher, but better. Lucas added, I asked her to read them. She never makes us. Eventually, the woman offered a clipped nod. Everything appears compliant. I'll file a closure notice. Then, just before leaving, she turned to Amanda. If someone in your circle made this report as a form of retaliation, she said quietly, you should be aware that false claims are taken seriously. Amanda's face drained of color. After the door closed, we all stood there, suspended in silence. Finally, Amanda turned to me. I wouldn't. I shook my head. I believe you. But someone did. She sank into the armchair, rubbing her temples. This is what happens when truth threatens the stories people tell themselves. Daniel walked over to me and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. You've been the steady one through all of this. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I gave him a tired smile. You see it now, that's enough. Later that night, I lit a candle by the window and sat with my notebook in my lap. I wrote a new story. Not for publication, just for us. I called it The Candle That Didn't Burn Out. It was about a flame passed from one hand to another, never flickering, even in wind and rain. Not because it was large, but because each person who carried it cupped it gently and walked on. As I wrote, Amanda knocked softly on my door. She entered with her phone in hand. I made a post, she said, to clarify things. About what happened. I raised an eyebrow. I tagged the parenting forums, she continued. The ones I used to follow. I told the truth. That I tried to silence something I didn't understand. And that my children found strength in the stories I wanted to hide. She handed me the phone. The post was simple. No drama, no backpedaling, just an honest paragraph. And at the end, a photo of Emma reading my book beside me on the couch. I don't expect applause, Amanda said. But I'm tired of pretending I wasn't wrong. I stood and pulled her into a gentle hug. She didn't pull away. I don't need applause. Either, I whispered. Just room at the table. She nodded. And for the first time, her shoulders relaxed. That wasn't just peace, it was arrival. A week after the visit from Child Services, I received a letter postmarked from Nebraska. The envelope was thick, handwritten, and the return address simply read, First Free Church. Inside was a packet of children's drawing stick figures holding books, crosses, suns beaming with wild yellow rays. At the bottom of each picture was a message. Thank you, Grandma Lucia. One page, likely dictated to a teacher, read, I like how she tells the truth without being mad. I set the packet on the kitchen table and ran my fingers over the words. I had no ties to Nebraska, no memories or relatives there. Yet somehow, I had reached them quietly, through paper and story. That same afternoon, I received a phone call from Wellspring. We'd like to organize a launch event, Melissa said. Something meaningful. We don't want the typical bookstore crowd. We were thinking of doing it in a library. One with stained glass windows and creaky floors. Somewhere you'd feel at home. I smiled. You're describing my heart. There's a place in Philadelphia, she continued. It's a converted rectory, built in the 1800s. It hosts literacy programs now. We'd gather readers, teachers, families. You could read from the book, maybe sign copies. Nothing too flashy. And what would you like me to wear? I teased. She laughed. Whatever you wear when you make soup. I agreed. The date was set for the first weekend of May. That night, I sat with Emma and Lucas in the living room. The three of us surrounded by books and unfolded blankets. Amanda was in the kitchen, humming as she loaded the dishwasher, something that would have stunned me months ago. Emma curled up beside me. Nona, are you famous? I laughed softly. Only in the way clouds are famous. Here one day, gone the next, but people remember how they felt under them. Lucas tilted his head. So, are we famous too? You're beloved, I said, brushing a hand over his hair. That's better than famous. He grinned and picked up one of my proof copies. I think I want to write a book too. You should. What will you write about? About a knight who prays before he fights, and his sword glows when he tells the truth. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'd love to read that. The day of the launch arrived with cool air and pink magnolia blossoms clinging to the edges of the sidewalks in Philadelphia. The building chosen for the event stood like a chapel, tall and weathered, with long windows that caught light like old secrets. When I arrived, the room was already filling. Rows of folding chairs, young. Parents with children perched on their laps. Librarians with name tags and tote bags full of bookmarked copies. A banner across the entryway read, "Stories Worth Keeping." An afternoon with Lucia R. Benedetti. I sat behind a modest table near the front, wearing what I always wore: lavender blouse, floral apron over simple skirt, and Pietro's gold. Crucifix resting against my heart. Sarah met me at the back of the room. There are over 100 people here, she said, her voice hushed. And more online. Online? We're live streaming. My knees nearly gave out. She steadied me by the elbow. Don't worry, she whispered. Just do what you've always done. Speak like you're holding one child in your arms. When I stepped to the small podium, the hum of the room quieted immediately. I didn't read a script. I didn't need to. I began with the story of Ruth and Naomi. I told it not as a scholar would, but as a grandmother might, full of pause and emotion, with the weight of experience hanging from every word. I spoke about loyalty, about the courage of staying when leaving would be easier. I told them how, when I felt unwanted, I found my voice not in shouting, but in telling the truth wrapped in kindness. I ended the reading with a quote from one of the children's drawings. I like how she tells the truth without being mad. Applause was gentle but sustained. A standing ovation, though I hadn't asked for one. Afterward, I sat at the signing table, greeting each family, answering children's questions about how long it took to write a book, or whether Jesus had. Pet. One little girl gave me a single daisy wrapped in tin foil. Another boy brought his grandmother's Bible and asked me to sign the inside cover dot by the end of the afternoon. My hands ached, but my spirit did not. I caught sight of Amanda and Daniel near the back wall. They had come unannounced. Amanda stood beside a display shelf with one of my books resting there, her arms folded, not in resistance, but in thought. Daniel nodded at me. Pride, quiet and overdue, shone behind his eyes. Emma waved from beside them, holding a small sign she had made on poster board. It read, "My Nona's stories make the world better." That night, in the hotel room Wellspring had arranged, I laid the daisy beside the lamp and opened my notebook. I wrote one more story. It was about a woman who thought she'd been dismissed, only to find that the world had simply been waiting for her to speak. And when she finally did, It wasn't revenge she found but return. The day after the launch event, I returned home to a kitchen that smelled of rosemary and lemon. Amanda had baked bread, her first attempt at the kind of rustic loaf I used to make every Saturday when Daniel was a child. It sat cooling on the wire rack beside the window, sunlight warming the crust. She was wiping down the counters when I came in. She looked up, offered a smile that didn't strain. I figured it was time I learned something from you besides boundaries. I chuckled and set my bag down. You'll need patience. The first 3 loaves are usually better used as doorstops. She leaned against the sink, arms crossed but loose. You were good yesterday. Not just the stories, the way you held the room. It wasn't forceful, but no one could look away. I took a seat at the table, easing into it as if I'd been gone for years. It was never about forcing, only offering. Emma and Lucas barreled down the stairs minutes later, voices overlapping with the news they'd seen me on a friend's Mum's phone. They brought a copy of the book with fresh stickers pressed onto the cover like medals. Lucas had added a note in blue crayon. Author lives in this house. I laughed until my ribs ached. Over the next week, life settled into something both ordinary and changed. The laundry still piled up. The dishwasher still groaned when overloaded. But something between us had softened. Amanda started asking questions, not as a skeptic, but as someone who had finally taken her hands away from her ears. What made you start writing again? She asked one afternoon while we shelled peas together. Loneliness, I said. But not the sad kind. The kind that reminds you there's more inside you than people remember. She nodded slowly. I think I forgot there was more to you than stories. Most people do, I said. Until the story they need is yours. That Friday, a letter arrived from my old parish St. Benedetta's, where I had taught Sunday school for decades before moving in with Daniel. It was from Father Roberto. Dear Ruth. It read, I followed your journey with a heart full of admiration. What you've done is not only faithful, it is brave. We are organizing a literacy outreach for grandparents and grandchildren. Would you consider speaking at the opening ceremony? I know many here still remember your voice from the children's chapel. So, do I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal. That night, I sat on the back porch with my tea in a fresh notebook. The garden lights flickered to life one by one. The hydrangeas were blooming again. Daniel joined me after the children had gone to bed. He carried 2 mugs coffee for him, chamomile for me. I've been thinking, he said as he handed it over. About legacy. I raised an eyebrow. That's a heavy word for a Friday night. He smiled, but didn't disagree. I used to think legacy was about what you built. Careers, bank accounts, degrees. But now I think maybe it's what people whisper about you when you're not in the room. Then I hope they whisper that I never gave up, I said. Will, he replied. They already do. We sat in silence, sipping our drinks. Then he added, You've changed this house, Mom, and not just the shelves filled with books. I didn't need to respond. We understood each other in that moment without any ceremony. The next day, I returned to the community library for the first time in years. The same place where I used to take Daniel when he was small, where he once lost a mitten under the biography. Section and cried like the world had ended. It had changed, of course. Brighter paint, new carpeting, but the same smell of old pages and dust caught in sunlight lingered. I was there to donate a box of books. Not just my own, but others I had loved over the years, books that had shaped me, soothed me, challenged me. I wanted them to find new hands. The librarian recognized me from the article. She didn't gush, just smiled and said, We cleared a shelf near the storytelling nook. It's yours now. A whole row labeled Grandma Lucia's pics. I thanked her, But my voice caught on the word mine. As I placed the books on the shelf, stone soup, The Lion and the Little Red Bird, psalm songs for sleep, I realized something unexpected. The fame, however modest, wasn't the victory. The victory was presence, being seen, not as background, not as burden, but as voice. When I left the library, a little girl was curled up in the beanbag chair near the reading corner. She was holding my book in her lap, tracing the pictures with her finger. I didn't interrupt her. I simply smiled and walked past. On my way home, I stopped by the florist and bought a single white rose at the house. I pressed it between 2 pages of my old Bible, where the story of Hannah was underlined. The ink had faded, but the memory hadn't. I whispered a small prayer, not for success or protection or more readers, but for Emma and Lucas. That they would remember not what I taught them, but how it made them feel. Hopeful, brave, seen. 3 months after the book launch, the buzz had settled into something quieter, something gentler. There were no more surprise phone calls from journalists, no more frantic interview requests or bookstore signings. The early swirl of attention had softened into a steady rhythm. A letter here, a photo there, a library adding the book to its shelves without fanfare. The world had moved on, but my story had stayed where it needed to be. That morning I awoke. Early, the house was still, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor settling. I pulled my shawl around my shoulders and stepped into the backyard. Barefoot on the dew-damp porch. The garden was finally blooming in full zinnias and sage, rosemary and mint, all bursting with quiet color and stubborn life. I bent to gather a few sprigs of lavender, tucking them into a small ceramic jar I kept by the back door. Pietro had made it years ago, when the children were small. His fingerprints were still faintly pressed into the glaze. It reminded me that some marks, once left in love, never fade. When I came back inside, Amanda was already at the stove, stirring oats with cinnamon. She turned and smiled, not a forced one, but one that felt lived in. "Coffee's brewing," she said. "Kids are packing their lunchboxes." "You're spoiling me," I said, sliding the lavender jar onto the table. "You spoiled us first," she replied. It had become our way, not to apologize endlessly, but to meet in gestures. A clean dish towel folded and draped over the sink. A hand on the shoulder as we passed in the hallway. Questions asked with curiosity instead of caution. Later that day I attended a volunteer meeting at the library. They were expanding their intergenerational reading program, children, paired with older readers to bridge the gap between worlds. The director, a kind-eyed woman named Maricel, asked if I would consider helping design the curriculum. "Not just your stories," she said, "but how to help others find theirs. Not everyone is a writer, but everyone remembers." That line stayed with me. Everyone remembers. So I said yes. I began leading Friday morning story sessions. Grandparents who had felt invisible began to show up, some in wheelchairs, some with trembling hands, some with journals so worn their pages crackled. They came with parables and accents thick with homeland dust, fables shaped by migration, poverty, grief, and laughter. I listened. I helped them write beginnings. Some cried, not from sadness, but relief. They hadn't realized their stories still had listeners. Emma and Lucas came to a few sessions. Emma sat beside me and once whispered, "They all sound like you." "No," I said. "They sound like themselves. That's what makes it holy." And then one Saturday morning, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in strong script. Inside, a bound copy of Letters to My Grandchildren, printed by Wellspring as a surprise. Sarah's note was tucked inside the front cover. We knew the letters weren't just yours. They belonged to the world too. I turned the pages slowly, my own handwriting typeset into permanence. Each letter I'd written to Emma and Lucas over. The past year was their tales of childhood faith, doubts, love, silence, forgiveness. The final letter ended with the words, "If they forget my name, that's all right. But may they remember the warmth of the stories I placed in their palms." The next Sunday, I brought the book with me to St. Benedetta's. The chapel smelled like beeswax and pine, just as it always had. The stained glass cast golden shapes on the pews. Father Roberto greeted me with open arms. "We've missed your voice," he said. "Would you read today's reflection?" I stood at the lectern, the leather-bound book in my hands, and opened to a passage I hadn't planned to share. It was the letter where I'd written about being silenced, how it felt when faith became something others tried to clean up, explain away, or hide. And then how it had returned. Not through force, but through pages passed hand to hand. When I looked up, there were tears in the eyes of 3 women in the front row. A young boy sat upright on his father's knee, listening as if I'd just unwrapped something secret and shimmering. I closed the book gently. "May we never confuse gentleness with weakness," I said. "And may we always remember that stories, when shared in love, are never lost." After Mass, I sat in the courtyard while birds flitted through the fig tree, and an older woman with silver braids approached me. "I heard what happened in your family," she said softly. "I lived it too. But I didn't write anything. I just faded." I reached for her hand and held it in both of mine. "You're still here," I whispered. "And that means your story isn't finished." She wept, and I let her. I had nothing to offer her except presence, and it was enough. That night, back home, I found Emma in my room. She held the lavender jar between her palms, eyes fixed on the dried stems. "Nona," she said, "how do you know when a story is over?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "When it begins to belong to someone else." She looked up at me, eyes wide with understanding. "Then yours isn't over," she said. "Because now it's mine too." And she was right. The book had been written. The noise had quieted. The healing had taken root. But the story, our story, was still unfolding. Every bedtime reading, every memory passed down, every truth spoken without shame. It all lived on. Not in sales. Not in awards. But in her. And in that I was complete.